everyone, welcome to the third episode of Climate Voyage podcast series. I'm Rasara Nandasena, and this podcast is conducted aligning with British Council Youth Climate Ambassador Program. Our main collaborators are British Council Sri Lanka, Global Youth Biodiversity Network Sri Lankan Chapter, and us. So today's episode is targeted on biodiversity and climate change with relevance to the Sri Lankan context. I'm glad to welcome the guest speaker for today, Professor Devaka Weerakoon. Professor Devaka Weerakoon is the head of the department and senior professor at Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences, University of Colombo. He is a renowned expert in Sri Lanka in the fields of biodiversity conservation, wildlife management, behavioral ecology, environmental policy, and numerous other areas. So join me in welcoming Professor Dev.
Good morning, Rasara.
It's nice to have you with us today, sir. So let us move to our discussion. So to initiate the discussion, could you provide an overview of the current state of biodiversity in Sri Lanka and its relationship with climate change?
That's a fairly complex question I think that we had to explore. Now, you know that Sri Lanka is a biodiversity hotspot, one of the 36 hotspots of the world. This is based on two main criteria. One of the criteria is that we have very high level of endemicity, that is plants, animals that are found only in Sri Lanka. The second criterion is the one that worries us, that majority of our endemic and threatened species, endemic plants and animals are threatened with extinction. So most of the biodiversity hotspots have the same problem. They have very high diversity, very high human pressure, and as a consequence, many species are looking at extinction within the next few decades. So this is the challenge that we have to deal with. And if we look at Sri Lanka's biodiversity, still we have very good biodiversity in terms of number of species and different types of ecosystems. And we have also protected a fair amount of our ecosystems in the country. But at the same time, I must say we also have number of drivers which are affecting our biodiversity. Perhaps the most critical driver is loss of habitat. We have lost roughly about 40 to 50% of the forest cover has been lost. And even now, even though the loss is less, we still lose roughly 7,000 to 10,000 hectares of forest per year due to development, encroachment, and variety of reasons. So this is one of the most critical issues, loss of habitat, or some habitats are becoming degraded, some habitats are becoming fragmented, some habitats are converted due to various human activities. So that is the fundamental issue. In addition to that, we also have issues such as overexploitation of some of our species, especially the marine resources, fish. And then thirdly, we have the issue of invasive species. We have a number of invasive species, especially invasive plants, that are posing a huge challenge because it's very difficult to manage these invasive species. And on top of this, we have climate change, which is now the earlier drivers I spoke about, that is habitat loss changes, overexploitation, invasive. These are short-term changes or changes that is happening rapidly. Whereas climate change is a slow change driven by slow rise of global temperature, which leads to changes in the water cycle, because what makes our planet unique is that we have water in its all three forms. We have solid water in the form of ice, we have liquid water, we recognize three different types of liquid water. 70% of our planet is covered with ocean, which is liquid water with high salinity. Then on the land, we have fresh water. And between the land-ocean interface, we have brackish water. Then we have water at the gaseous phase as water vapor. Now these three, water keeps cycling between these three different forms of matter, that is solid, liquid, and gas. And what drives this cycle is temperature. So when there is a change in temperature, that has an impact on how the cycle works. And as a result, we see that the natural weather patterns are changing. We have a lot of rain within a short period of time. Then we have prolonged droughts. Now, when you have a lot of rain, you have other issues like landslides, floods. These all affect biodiversity. So these are happening slowly, but they're definitely happening. And they will have long-term consequences, and it will make the existing drivers even worse. Now, we have certain predictions for climate change in Sri Lanka. If I may share my screen, I can show you some of the predictions for Sri Lanka. One thing that we are seeing is changes in rainfall patterns. Then we are also going to have issues with regarding to changes. Now, rainfall is one of the primary determinants of climate zones. And out of these three climate zones, this is basically defined by rainfall, temperature, and so on. So what I will show you now is the climate change prediction for Sri Lanka. So if you look at this map, you can see the current status here. You can see the wet zone in green, the dry zone in brown, and then the intermediate zone. Now, this is the prediction that our wet zone somehow will extend a little bit. The intermediate zone is going to extend quite a bit to the eastern coast, and the dry zone is going to reduce. Now, if you look at our different ecosystems, their distribution is defined by the climate. If you look at the wet zone, we have rainforest. And as we move to the mountain areas, we have mountain forest. In the intermediate forest, we have intermediate forest. And in the dry zone, dry mixed evergreen forest. So the distribution of these ecosystems are defined by the climate boundaries. Now, what you see here is the climate boundaries shifting. So when the climate boundary is shifting, it is likely that the ecosystems will also, some ecosystems will expand, some will shrink with the boundary, the changes in the bound. And the other thing is, if you look at the central mountain, this is one of the most biodiverse areas because we have number of endemic species that are restricted to the mountain region alone. Now, when the temperature increases, that means the areas which are today, when the ambient temperature is, let's say, average temperature is 25, it may become 26. So if a species needs 25, they will have to now move further into the temperature that they prefer. So as the temperature increases, the colder region is going to shrink also, which means the mountain habitats are also going to shrink. A serious issue because all these critical mountain species, now we will have an issue with them because they will have less habitat to deal with. So these are some of the general predictions we have with respect to what will happen to our habitats and species. Now, if the habitat is expanding, that will favor species that live in that habitat. So the species will also expand. But if a habitat is shrinking, then the issue is with the shrinking habitat, the populations will also decline, and some of them are already threatened. So further decline in the population may lead to them becoming more threatened in the future. Now that is those are some of the issues that we have to deal with on the land. Now, the unfortunate thing is most of our climate change related predictions for biodiversity are general predictions. We haven't done the necessary monitoring to actually measure what is happening. For instance, now if I earlier I pointed out that now if the habitat is changing or if the zones are changing, for instance, if I may share my screen again, if you see this boundary here, you can see that this boundary is now changing. So there is an interface here. If you take this boundary, if it is going to change, the dry area is going to get more intermediate. Or if the boundary between the intermediate and wet is going to change, we have to have monitoring plots in these interfaces to see whether the ecosystem is advancing or shrinking. If we don't monitor, if we don't have tangible data, we cannot actually say this is happening. Same thing in the mountain region. If the temperature zones are shifting, we have to have monitoring stations in the interface, which will allow us to actually collect empirical data and make some more concrete predictions as to what is happening. So the things that I have explained to you thus far is mostly based on general observations and what has been reported elsewhere in the world. So I think we have been pushing for establishing permanent monitoring plots in these interfaces where we are predicting climate change related climate zone changes so that we can have long-term data to actually take some very informed decisions about what is happening in the country. So that is one aspect. Now, we being an island, we have there are benefits and costs. Now, because we are an island, we have an ocean around us, we have a coastal zone that has given us a more varied set of ecosystem. Like for a landlocked country like Nepal, they don't have mangroves, they don't have coral reefs, they don't have salt marshes, so this any of the coastal zones, and they have no marine habitat. Whereas we have an ocean that is 8 times the size of the land that we have. And between the ocean and the land, we have a coastal zone, roughly 1,400 kilometers of coastal zone, where we have some very critical habitats like mangroves, uh, salt marshes, mud flats, and then immediately offshore we have seagrass beds, which support very interesting organisms like dugongs. Then we have some very rich coral reefs. So when we talk about climate change impact, we should not only focus on what will happen to terrestrial biodiversity, we must also pay attention to what is happening in the ocean and the coastal zone. Now, according to climate change predictions, there's going to be two issues that we have to be concerned about. One is when you have increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this carbon dioxide dissolves in water. So it dissolves in seawater, brackish water, and fresh water. And carbon dioxide, when they enter into water, they react with water. and produce an acid called carbonic acid. So this is a very slow reaction, what we refer to as a reversible reaction. Carbon dioxide combines with water form H2CO3 in a reversible manner. So if you increase one of the components in this formula, then the reaction is pushed in the other direction. So if you increase carbon dioxide, it leads to more acid formation. So this is one of the big issues we have to worry about, is acidification of the oceans, because now the ocean has planktons which has carbon skeletons and calcium skeletons. Now calcium dissolves in acid, so this will have an impact on their skeleton and their survival, and that will have an impact on the oceanic uh, food chains, basically, because these planktons are the first link in the food chain. And if you see a reduction in plankton, the food chains are affected. And also the planktons in the ocean are the main contributors to oxygen on the planet. Because we look at the oxygen production, the major share is produced by oceanic photosynthesis. So that is also going to be affected, but that's not an impact on Sri Lanka, that's a global impact. But nevertheless, acidification will have an issue. And then when when the global temperature increases, the water temperature increases. Water temperatures is very important for coral reefs. They're very sensitive to changes in temperature. So if the temperature increases, which is something that happens naturally during El Nino, for people, you may have heard about El Nino effect, which slightly increases temperature, which leads to coral bleaching. Now we are looking at a gradual temperature increase in the ocean, which will again lead to coral bleaching. So when the corals start bleaching, then the fish that lives in the coral, the colorful fish, will find that it's difficult for them to survive. So we are going to see a decline in the diversity of fish in the coral system. So these are some of the issues that will happen in the ocean. And since the temperature will change the water cycle, it will cause more melting down of ice. Now, ice in the poles generally reflect light. So when the ice melts, the ocean, which is a darker water, is exposed. And there, you know that when you look at light absorption, white color absorbs less, but black color absorbs more. That is why you wear white clothes when you are playing outside cricket, because it reflects more light. Whereas if you wear a dark clothes, you will get more water, because dark uh, objects absorb more light. So when the ice melts and exposes the darker sea underneath, it will start absorbing more heat. And as a result, melting will increase. So we are going to go into a very dangerous cycle of melting, exposing the dark area, which leads to more ocean more melting. And that will result in increasing the water volume. And that will result in sea level rise. And we being an island, sea level rise will inundate our coastal zone. So our coastal habitats will be subjected to erosion, various seaborne threats like storm surges. So we are looking at some serious impacts on land, on the coastal zone, and then in the ocean outside. So these are not going to happen overnight. They are going to happen slowly. This is the problem with slow changes, because when you see rapid changes, people recognize it, people respond to it. But slow changes are like a slow cancer growing inside you, very slowly killing you, but you don't recognize it. If you have a heart attack or something, then you know, like, immediately do something about it. So because of this, people don't respond to this at the rate that we should be. And if you look at the global scenario, now we have had the entire uh, global convention, and we have come up with various protocols. The idea, and we have Paris Accord, all these things are there to get countries to reduce their carbon footprint. Now, tomorrow, the World Biodiversity Day, the theme is from agreement to action. Now, we have agreed, but we have not acted upon those agreements. And as a consequence, you see the carbon dioxide levels are rising. Now it has gone over 400 levels that have not existed for nearly 800,000 years in the Earth's history when we look at changes. So we've recognized the problem. We have agreed to do something about it, but we have not done it. And this hypocrisy is going to have an impact because if the longer we delay, the harder it becomes to respond. So I think I gave a very long answer as I of your question because it was a loaded question. And I think I tried to cover the basic overview of the nexus between biodiversity and climate change.
So the next question from me is, you have already answered that. Are there any specific ecosystems, habitats, or wildlife populations that are specifically vulnerable to climate change?
I think I answered part of your question,
Yeah.
but I would like to stress again on the importance of our mountain biodiversity.
Mountain.
Because the mountain region in Sri Lanka, we have lost nature because you know that we are a tea growing country. So we have converted much of our land in the wet zone to either tea or rubber or various other plantations. So the mountain natural habitats have declined to about 3 to 4% of their original coverage. And now, with the climate change, we are going to have further shrinkage. And there are a number of species that are only found in our mountain region, and they are endemic to Sri Lanka. So already they are restricted to a very small area. And if that area shrinks further, their continued survival is going to be a serious issue. So again, we have no empirical data to support any of this. There's some modeling data, but again, there are issues about it. But I think our mountain zone, which is highly neglected at the moment, the Central Highlands, and also isolated inselbergs like Ritigala, Maragala, those are all very important for Sri Lanka's biodiversity conservation. So they are also going to be impacted. So not only the coastal, but I think mountain zone requires some special attention in the future as to see what we can do to help these species to adapt to these predicted changes.
Because is there any specific wildlife population that are vulnerable to climate change? Because it's a slow process. But have we identified such species, or it can be a flora or fauna?
Like I said, we haven't specifically identified things, but these are the general predictions we have. So if you look at not the larger charismatic species, probably are more impacted by other issues like conflict and so. So I think climate change, elephants, leopards, bear, these I think are the climate, before climate change catches up with them, I think conflict is going to have some serious impact on them. But I think the populations that I am worried about, that we pay less attention to, are things like amphibians. Now we are the amphibian hotspot, and there are a number of frogs that are restricted to mountain zone. What will happen to them? We have a number of reptiles restricted to mountain zone. These are, of course, small creatures. They're not charismatic, and we don't pay much attention to them. But what will happen to them is an issue. And we even have some bird species that are only found in the mountain region. So when we look at some of our mountain species, wildlife populations, And we also have certain subspecies of more common species like now the bear monkey. The subspecies of the purple-faced langur is restricted to the mountain region. Or if you take the loris, the the subspecies in the mountain region is much bigger, much darker. It's probably a different species also. So these populations, which are already small, highly stressed, are going to be further stressed by these climate change driven changes. So those are things, again, I'm talking in very general terms, but this is the type of research we need, this type of work that you have to start now. And this is not research like, I mean, the general biodiversity research is it's a 2 or 3, 4 year project, whereas climate change based research has to be long-term project. It's something that I will not be able to finish during my lifetime. I can initiate it, but maybe you or the youth tomorrow will be the people who will continue, and even your generation might not finish that piece of research, because these are things that have to be done over a period of 40, 50 years to understand what kind of trends are catalyzed by these climate change driven changes. But that is something that we really need. We needed it yesterday. But even if we have it today or tomorrow, that is good enough.
Thank you very much, sir. The next question that I have for you is like, are there any synergies or conflicts between climate change mitigation strategies and biodiversity conservation efforts in Sri Lanka? So, like, can we strike a balance between these two or something like that?
Yes, I think we should. But sometimes now, when you look at mitigation, you have two approaches. One are the hard mitigation, the engineering solutions. For instance, if you have now seawater intrudes now in the sea level rise, seawater enters into our estuaries and rivers. So they come further up in the river. And if you look at our human settlements, most of our major cities are in the coastal zone. And the drinking water for these cities are abstracted from the major rivers that are associated. Now, if you take Colombo, we are associated with Kalnigaga, Kalutara with Kaluganga, Galle with Ginga. So we basically abstract our drinking water requirement from these rivers. Now, when the seawater starts coming up the river, some of this drinking water, now the main intake for Colombo is Abatale. Now, Abatale is now threatened by seawater intrusion. So what we'll now have to do is we'll have to build what are called barriers, salt water barriers, to prevent seawater from coming and challenging our fresh drinking water intake. But when you build a barrier, now when you take a river, it's a continuous system. And some of the species that are in the river keep moving up and down. Now, if we take an eel, the eel will go to the ocean, breed, and the young ones enter the estuary. They go into the river, and they become adults in the river, and they go back to the sea. We don't have the rivers of it is the salmon. We don't have salmon in this country. But we also have other species like gobies who move from upstream to the estuary to breed. Then you have fish that move from the sea to the estuary. So estuary is a happening place. Now, when you put a barrier in the estuary, and the crocodiles, the salt crocodiles, they move through the sea from estuary to estuary and then up the river. So when you put these kinds of barriers, if you don't design it properly, that is going to disrupt these movements, which are essential for these species to complete their life cycles. So if you block their life cycle, then if they can't complete their life cycle, they are going to be threatened, and maybe they may disappear from some of the river system. So these are just an example. Now, even if you want to, the other issue is landslides. When you have a lot of rain, you can have landslides happening. So we can have engineering solutions. We can use nailing, various types of reinforcement walls. These are structures that hard structures that we can use. Or if you take coastal erosion, we can have riprap structures and things like that. But there is also growing uh, interest in the world, which are called nature-based solutions. Instead of engineering solutions, can we use nature to solve our problem? Now, instead of having a riprap structure on the coastal zone, can we grow coastal vegetation? Or if mangroves are possible, can we grow mangroves there? Because if you put a riprap structure, a wall or a growing, it will prevent only erosion, but it will not give you any other benefit. If you grow mangroves, the mangroves will is not a static structure, it's a dynamic structure. It will capture sediments and it will help grow. It will not only stop erosion, it will help you to grow the coastal zone. And the fish in the ocean and the fish in the river will use the mangrove for reproduction. So it provides other services. So now if you put a hard structure, it only answers the question or the problem that you are trying to address of stopping erosion. But it doesn't provide you any other service. Whereas if you grow a mangrove belt, it will stop erosion and it will give you a number of other services that the mangroves provide. So this is the argument that instead of, we might not be able to use uh, nature-based solutions everywhere. Sometimes you may need hard solution. But unfortunately, at the moment, our focus is mostly on the hard solution, not the nature-based solutions. If you want to stabilize a slope, we can stabilize it by reforestation, which will take time though. Nature-based solutions, you can grow a tree overnight. So these are slow, but they give you long-term protection and they give you additional services. And they are sometimes even much stronger now. If you look back, I don't know whether you can remember the 2004 tsunami. Maybe you were a child then. But when the tsunami came, what we saw is that the hard structures didn't have, whereas natural things like mangroves, coastal vegetation provide and offshore coral reefs provided us better security from the seaborne threat. So when you compare the ability to provide resilience, when you compare the hard structures with natural structures, the natural structures are much better. They should be because these have been tried and tested for millions of years compared to our hard structures which have developed over the last 100, 200 years. So they have been tried and tested by nature. That is the argument that we are presenting. But these are little hard. If you want to put a wall, you can do it within few months and it can be done easily. It's costly, but it can be done. But growing a mangrove, it requires some effort, some money, a lot of motivation, and you have to stay with it for a while until it gets off the boat. So those are the barriers that prevents people from going for nature-based solutions. But we have to find a mix between the two. We cannot simply depend on hard engineering solutions. And to answer your question, how can we strike a balance? We need to bring these ideas in, at least try it in few places, see whether it works, understand what kind of barriers we have. But we have to take the step towards that. I've seen in some places we are doing it, but not enough. We have to maybe upscale some of these positive pilots into bigger projects and thereby try to strike the balance that you asked me about.
I just want to move this discussion to a different direction. So it's about the conservation efforts that involve community participation. So in Sri Lanka, like it's a developing country and more than 80% of our population is in rural areas and they directly interact with those ecosystems like forests and mangroves and they depend on those ecosystems. So like well, As you think, what role do local communities and community-based conservation initiatives play in protecting biodiversity and mitigating the impact of climate change in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think communities have a huge role to play. If you look at, we are getting funding under the CBD called the GEF, Global Environmental Facility, which provides funding directly to civil society organizations to promote communities to actively engage. Because now the problem the communities will have in doing some of this work, number one, like you say, they're rural communities, they're poor, and they do not have the money to do this activity. And number two, they may not have the right kind of skills or the core skills that are required. Let's say a community wants to undertake a reforestation project. Now, reforestation or a restoration is based on a certain conceptual framework called restoration ecology that requires certain knowledge, which may not be. Now, the local people will have indigenous knowledge that they have acquired over generations of planting trees and so on. But there are a lot of modern concepts that can improve these indigenous approaches. What we really need again is to understand this is not something that one group can do. The government alone cannot do it. Local communities alone cannot do it. Private sector alone cannot do it. But what we need to be thinking if we are to survive, that's what SDG goal 17 also tells us, provide, forging partnerships. Partnerships are very important because a partnership is a collective of people, each one bringing a different skill to the table, different viewpoint to the table. And when you put all these things together, you can find synergy rather than one person or one community or one group trying to do it. So I think during the next 8 or 9 years, we are living in the decade of restoration. And recently, the whole Montreal Biodiversity Framework has come, which also calls for restoration work and work on the ground. So we need to know if we are to achieve these targets, we must forge meaningful collaborations, partnerships between universities, private sector organizations, youth groups, local communities, government. And by doing that, I think we can maybe deliver some meaningful outcomes because different people will bring the different speciality into it. So to answer your question, yes, communities must be part of the formula because one of the things that drive communities to overexploit biodiversity is poverty. So if you're going to invest on restoration, we must find a way to involve the community. So part of the investments will go to create livelihoods. That money will go to the community that will address the poverty, which will also make communities understand that they can engage with biodiversity in a different way, which will give them a livelihood, maybe more money, more things they can do. So how do we break? That's a huge paradigm shift we are talking about, a shift from how we are doing things. But that is a necessity because if you are living, we are living in a world that has many challenges, and can understand as youth, you're probably more concerned about this because we have lived our life, but you have whole life ahead of you, and you would be thinking, what kind of world am I inheriting? But I think it is up to us. We create the world because we have created the mess, and we are the ones who have the ability to address the mess. But we can't approach this problem using the same traditional toolbox, which has not worked this far. Because if you look at our ability to address many of these global targets, we are not even getting close. And if we try to use the same approach and try to achieve these 23 only Montreal targets, the chances are we are going to end up failing again. So now we have to rethink, change our approach and try some new things. Maybe they might not work, but we know the old approach doesn't pay off. So I think that is what we have to be thinking about. How can we involve communities? How can we bring private sector? Because all this requires money. The government alone cannot fund it. So the private sector is interested because now business as usual model is no more. They also have to change their business model because people are now, the buyers are more interested in knowing whether it is sustainable production, especially the European, North American markets. If they buy a box of tea, they want to know whether this tea has been produced in a sustainable manner. So they have to show some things that they are doing on the ground to, so they are forced to take certain certificates, do certain things, and uh, and when people are forced to do things, and eventually they will realize the value of it, and they will voluntarily come into this. I've seen a lot of private sector organizations investing heavily on trying to reduce their carbon footprint, investing on restoration projects. Now what we have to do is see whether we can forge these kinds of uh, partnerships. I'll give you one example. We're doing a project in uh, Carnelia. Carnelia is one of the most important conservation forests we have in Sri Lanka. In the boundary of Carnelia, there are areas where people have been doing shifting cultivation, they have abandoned it. Now we have declared this as a protected area, so the people have moved out. But because the areas have been under cultivation for a long time, the natural succession doesn't happen the way we expected. Generally, if you abandon a land, slowly the forest will take over. But here, because the soil is impoverished and it has been subjected to long-term cultivation, natural succession is halted. So we started a project called Life Project where we are trying to grow a forest. Uh, take a degraded area like that and convert it into a natural forest. So here I see a fantastic partnership. I'm also involved in it. I think that's one of the I feel privileged to be part of that project because in your life, very rarely you get a chance to bring effective change. So I think this is one project where I saw that I can contribute to bring effective change. So we are at the moment we are growing about 30 acres of forest in a degraded patch. So IUCN, the Sri Lanka office, and I'm also working with that team. We are giving all the technical knowledge, the what plants to grow, how do you deal with the restoration ecology part we bring. The forest department is another partner. They have provided the land. There are 12 private sector organizations who are coming up with the funds. There is Biodiversity Sri Lanka, which is a platform that coordinates private sector. They are also partners. And people in the area are actually, they get paid to do the work. So this is the type of partnership I'm talking about. It's a small partnership. It's a small project. 25 acres of reforestation is dropped in the ocean at the moment. But we are testing the protocol so we can upscale it, this model, maybe to a much bigger area in the future. So first you have to work out the modalities. That's what we are doing. But we have now established a model that can be upscaled. So a similar model is done in Ane Vilinda for again driven by Biodiversity Sri Lanka, campus private sector organizations, local communities, and other partnership where they are trying to restore the mangrove ecosystems in Ali Vilonda. So like this, there are a number of projects that are happening around where IUCN is doing another project with Poison, or now they have changed their name into INSEE, Sri Lanka. They are doing mining in Putlam, Aruwakalu for cement production, and once they finish their mining, they restore that area. So the INSEE is doing the restoration, they're putting the money, IUCN brings the technology, the local communities do the work. So once again, we see this. So there are many partnerships unfolding, albeit very small, but it gives us hope. There's promise to take some of these working partnerships and upscale it tomorrow to bigger projects if the money becomes available.
The next question from me is, so in your research and experience, what are some of the potential long-term consequences of biodiversity when it comes to climate change context?
I think what I would like to stress here for that question is there is a very strong connection between biodiversity and people, because we get a lot of services from biodiversity, from ecosystems, which we refer to as ecosystem services. And we further categorize them as provisional things that ecosystems provide us, like food, timber, medicine, things of that nature. And then there are supporting services. The ecosystems provide us services that are necessary to support human processes, such as pollination. Now, pollination is a very important aspect of agriculture. Now, in agriculture, what we're trying to do is produce food for people. And most of these are fruits or products that are resulting from pollination of a flower. So if a tree has 100 flowers and only 50 flowers are pollinated, that tree is producing only 50% of what it is capable of. So we are seeing in the world a decline in pollinators. We are seeing a global decline in biodiversity. Among the species that are disappearing, some of them are performing the very important function of pollination. Now, there is a piece of research I read in, it was done in India, where they wanted to introduce bee boxes into farmers. So they thought producing bee boxes will give them an additional income because now the farmers are having their marginal livelihoods. So what these people thought is we'll give them an additional livelihood to diversify their income sources. Now, so the project went on. As time went, they began to see that yields are increasing in their farmlands. And when they looked into it, what they realized is before the bee boxes were introduced, there was not enough pollinators, so the plants are not getting fully pollinated and therefore they are underproducing. Now the bee boxes introduce bees into the landscape, which increase the pollination capacity, and the yields increase. Some have even increased by 200%. So this shows the problem we are facing. When you have fewer pollinators, the trees produce less food, and therefore what we do is, in order to bridge that gap, we grow more. We clear more forest and we try to grow more trees to get our target. But in doing so, we drive further biodiversity loss. So I think this this is why I think what I said, that we have to think differently. So the answer to lower productivity sometimes is not growing more, but addressing a core problem, which is maybe your plants are not producing 100% because there's a lack of service here. Or same thing applies to the soil. Now, in order for us to grow a plant, we need sunlight, we need water, we need pollinators, we need soil. The plants grow on soil, and the soil has a structure, and it provides the nutrients for plant growth. Now, the structure and the nutrients are affected by the soil biodiversity, microscopic organisms that live in the soil, which none of us care about because we can't see them. We only see what is above ground. None of us go looking to see what is beneath the ground. But when you look underneath in the soil, there are millions of different species living there, performing silent duties for man, like recycling material. Or if you take the earthworms, they're tunneling through the soil, allowing air to seep into the soil, allowing water to increasing water retention capacity. So these soil biodiversity, even though they're ignored, even though we don't care about them, they are performing some critical functions without us asking them. But the way we are doing things, we are killing the soil biodiversity. And therefore, the soil is not operating the way they should be. So the ability for that soil to nourish the plant is less. And as a result, we have to keep adding fertilizer. Now, the fertilizer gets washed into aquatic bodies and creates secondary issues like eutrophication. Whereas if we maintain the soil biodiversity, we have to put less fertilizer in there. And they will be able to recycle the material. They will be able to maintain the soil. And also, sometimes when you take a fruit or anything, there are nutrient values. Now, some of the new research shows the fruits today or the vegetables today don't have the same nutritional value because in order to, when we say nutrition, we are expecting our food to have the four major elements, which is protein, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. Then we need certain minerals, we need certain vitamins. In order for those things to be produced, the plants require certain raw material, certain metal types, certain molecules. And if they don't have it, you still have a fruit, but it has fewer nutritional components, therefore the nutrition value will be less. And this is one of the other issues, a main and unseen problem, because you are eating a mango, but it doesn't taste the way it used to be 10 years ago. Or you are eating a papaya, a fruit which doesn't taste as much because it is a mango, but probably doesn't have the kind of ingredients it should be having because the soil doesn't have. So I think these are some of the issues that we have to be thinking about. So the biodiversity provides us this more spiritual enlightenment. Those are called cultural service, and then regulation, regulating carbon dioxide and thereby climate, regulating water cycles. So they perform a lot of services. Now, if you take an ecosystem, it's like us. If you take a person, I'm comprised, I start from atoms to molecules to organ systems and an individual. We have a hierarchy. Now, if one of my organs doesn't work properly, then I will be classified as unhealthy because my health, if my kidneys are not working properly, then I'm sick. I'm not healthy. And if you take a sick person, they cannot work properly. In an office, if we have 100 people, if 50% of them are catching the flu or whatever, then that office doesn't run effectively because your people are sick all the time. If the office is to function properly, you have to have a healthy group of people running that office. Likewise, the ecosystem also has a head, even though we don't think of it like that. Like our health, ecosystem health depends on diversity. That's one of the things. The different organisms that are in that ecosystem performing different functions. The guys in the soil recycling things, the pollinators pollinating the flowers, the seed dispersal agents dispersing the seeds. All these agents, all these species in the ecosystem have a job to do. And when they do the job properly, the ecosystem functions as a very efficient unit. But when species are disappearing, when you take species out of that ecosystem, it's like taking a kidney out sometimes. It's like taking a lung. They will not be able to perform. And if the ecosystem cannot function as a healthy ecosystem, they can't be providing those services I'm talking to. So we must understand if we want, if we are thinking very selfishly, if we want to benefit from these services in the long run, it is good for us to keep these ecosystems healthy. Or if you take even a wetland in Colombo, if we pollute it, it will not allow species like dragonflies to grow. And if dragonflies are not there, they can't control the insect population. So vectors like Aedes albopictus can rapidly increase and they will start spreading diseases. So when the ecosystem health declines, eventually our health is going to be affected. So very few people make this connection because it's not apparent, it's not intuitively obvious to anybody unless somebody shows these connections. I mean, this is where awareness becomes very important, I think, for people to understand these connections in nature, to understand we are part of that natural complex. And it is important for us to keep that complex the way it is without changing the balance and creating situations which will eventually come and harm us. We can, of course, come up with releasing no water because that's how people work. You create a problem and then you try to come up with a different solution to that rather than addressing the root causes of your problem, whether we look at conflict or ecosystem degradation. We are not addressing the root cause. We are trying to come up with additional solutions which further aggravates the problem. Like if a human wildlife conflict happens because you are giving your solid waste disposal creates additional food which results in the population growth that creates the conflict instead of addressing your uh, uh, the solid waste mismanagement. What we will do is we will try and kill the animals to control their population. This is the kind of thinking that we have. So this is not going to work because you can't be killing everything. At the end of the day, we are standing alone with nobody around us in a desert, and then we will realize it's too late to do anything. So this is why I think ecologists keep stressing, pay attention to nature. It won't hurt you to do that because it will help you in the long run. That is the message. That is the answer I think I have for you regarding this. And so the climate change is again going to exacerbate the problems we are creating in ecosystem because when the ecosystems become unhealthy, they will not be able to address with these climate change driven changes. And as a consequence, it will make things worse. So that is the long-term consequence of biodiversity loss. Ecosystems will be less resilient, they are less able to adapt, and therefore there will be further destruction. And then we will be affected because ecosystem won't be able to provide us the service they are providing, whether it be protecting a coastal zone from erosion or preventing floods by controlling the flow of water in a river or increasing our yield by pollinating our crops. Those services will be lost, and that will be a long-term impact on us and the planet as a
So like as a final question, just I want to ask you, as a conservation researcher, so what advice can you give to our researchers or policymakers, organizations, or even for individuals when it comes to trying to do conservation efforts?
I think from the policymakers side, I think we have to I stressed the point, I think, at the earlier part of this discussion about the need to monitor, need to have solid data so that we can take better decisions. So we need investment from the state to because an individual or organization cannot run long-term monitoring program. So we need, but we as scientists can advise how to set up that monitoring, where to place the monitoring plots, what is the protocol where to do. And then people like you, which are the youth, which are very active, can come and take part in the actual data collection. But somebody will have to put the money. So the state and the private sector probably will have to do it. Probably the state is the best because we are looking at keeping this going for maybe 40, 50 years. Annual investments will be low because you don't have to do a lot of work every year. But we have to have assured funding because if the funding stops maybe 5 years down the road, if it's a 50-year monitoring plot, then we wasted money. So we have to have that kind of long-term commitment from the state to this kind of work so that we can collect the necessary data so that we can take informed decisions. So that is one of the critical requirements. We have also included this in our NDCs or nationally determined contributions, that the need to establish and continue monitoring to see, capture what kind of changes in biodiversity is affected by climate change. And also, we need to have some policy level change. We were talking earlier about the balance between hard solutions and ecosystem-based solutions. Again, the government will have to come and provide some policy framework to do that. That maybe we should consider both or provide incentives for nature-based solutions. Maybe the private sector can do it. Today, there are new financial models, but you need policy state policy to support it. Let's say the private sector wants to invest on restoration of nature-based solution. Can you give them some tax relief or some? Because it has to be give and take. So whether do we have the policy to do that? So I think from the state sector, we would expect them to provide more funding for this kind of long-term monitoring. Maybe there are certain policy barriers preventing us from doing certain things. Take those barriers and address them. Maybe we may need new laws or amendment of existing laws to try out some of these new approaches we are talking about. So that is again part of the government's duty. And also, we have a lot of plans. We have climate change adaptation plans, we have national biodiversity strategic action plan. We have shelves full of plans, but very little of those plans become activated on ground. So again, bringing to tomorrow's theme, from agreement to action. We have agreements, no action. Why? So we have to look at that. And we have to, because these plans will say, so and so has to do these things, and another agency have to do this. So we have identified actions to be carried out by different agencies. But the fact is that those agencies don't know that they're supposed to do it because some of them have not read the plan. So if we have a plan, we have to make sure that we tell everybody who is supposed to play a role in that plan, this is the plan, this is what you are expected to do. Get them into your annual work plans and use the money that you are allocated to do your work to get some of these things done. So if you do not integrate these plans into the actual work, now the university has a work plan. Department of Wildlife Conservation has a plan of work for they have annual work plan and a budget. So if they don't know that they are expected to do these things under NBSAP or national climate adaptation plan, they will not get into this plan. If they don't get into the annual plan, they will not happen. And therefore, we have a plan and we have people doing something other than it. So how do we bridge this gap? This is, I think, a very huge challenge. This requires huge interventions from state sector and commitment from all these agencies so that they will make this part of their work, and only then we will be able to get these actions to be a reality on ground. And then we also need to have some policy to reduce forest because we are doing lots of agriculture expansion projects, but we are still pursuing a very old agriculture development model. You build a big tank, you clear several thousand hectares of land and grow paddy or something, which is giving us marginal outcomes. But today there's technology. Can we maybe invest on technology and reduce the loss of forest, reduce the use of pesticide, reduce the use of fertilizer, and maybe come up with better amount of production? We never tried those new paradigms. We're still pursuing with the old thing, and a small country like us with a very limited land area cannot afford to do that. And even if you look at our settlement practice, you go to any country in Southeast Asia, which are much more developed than us, you go to Singapore, you go to Malaysia, you see vertical development. We are still going on horizontal. We are taking land and splitting them. Now, if you look at the number, earlier when I was a child, or I was your age, the land plot was about 20 perches. Now, when the children grow up, you break it into 6 perch land plots and 4 people build houses. And that takes away space for things like monkeys, jackals, these other urban wildlife. So they are disappeared. And therefore we have imbalance. We have rat issues, we have bandicoot issues. So we are creating a huge imbalance by trying to do things the way we are doing because our population is increasing. We can't be thinking like the way we in 1900 where we have maybe 3 million. Now we have 21 million. They all need houses. So we have to start changing our land use planning. We have to start going vertical and try and save as much land as possible, keep it green. So this is possible. Countries like South Korea, Japan have shown that it is possible. We have not just taken up those things. So I think we have to change the way we are doing things. Maybe not overnight, but slowly we have to take steps towards that because that is necessary. And we have to make some of these plans work because these are wonderful plans. If we implement them, a lot of these problems can be resolved. But the fact remains we won't implement them. And then I think the citizens as a whole must be aware. I think that's where the type of work that you are doing to create awareness among youth groups, among people who are going to be leaders tomorrow, getting this message across to them, making environment part of their formula. Because today, when we take decisions, environment is the least that we care about. It's always people first. But can we have a world where people and environment have equal consideration? Then only we can think of sustainability. So this is something that we have to be doing. It's a struggle. I have been a youth like you a long time ago, spent most of my life trying to, create awareness, do research, and maybe one day we'll reach my age, turn back and look at what have I done. But we cannot give up. We must continue because if we are looking for a better world tomorrow, we have to work harder. That is the only way we can bring change. And change is necessary because the business as usual will not help us to address some of these huge challenges that are ahead of us. So I hope that answers your question.
So thank you very much, sir. So this is the end of the podcast, Climate Voyage, where we talk about the link between biodiversity and climate change. So we will meet again in the next episode, episode 4 of Climate Voyage. Goodbye, everyone.